What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
All right, Jack. First and foremost, thank you for your service to our country. I just feel honored to have conversation with you after all the great work you've done for us.
Oh man, thank you so much. That means a lot. But so many guys out there did so much more than I could have ever hoped to have done. So yeah, one of those things.
Does it? It's funny. Does it make you feel weird when people thank you for that, or do you not know what to say? Or I know you so badly just want to give credit to others, even though you're serving for decades and doing all this amazing work for us. Like, how does it make you feel when people say that?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it's one of those things where what are you supposed to say? I would say the same thing. I still do say the same thing to people, particularly guys from Vietnam that served during a time when they didn't necessarily come home to a warm welcome. Necessarily have a lot of the programs out there, both governmental and non-governmental, that are there today to assist people either dealing with issues or just give them a helping hand into the next phase of life. So I say something similar. I usually thank them for their time in uniform, and we see where the conversation goes from there. But for me, I just know so many people that have done so much and sacrificed so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
What is the best way for us non-veterans, non-military people to say thank you in a meaningful way to people who have served?
Oh, I don't know. It's that I appreciate. I know some people don't like to hear thank you or whatever, but hey, what else was someone supposed to say who feels sincere about that and wants to express it? Like that's that works.
Okay. I say that because obviously I think it's just so important, but I was reading a story about you, and correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, because not everything you read on the internet is correct, but I heard that when you were younger, you only really wanted to be two things: a Navy SEAL and a fiction writer. Is that right?
That is right. That is right.
Okay. What age were you, and how did you have such clear direction of what you wanted to do when you were little?
Yeah, I think some of it's just in the DNA. But other than that, my grandfather was killed in World War II. So I grew up with his medals and the silk maps they used to give aviators back then. He was a Marine aviator, flew a Corsair, which is the one that has the gold wings. And at the time, I think it was actually in reruns, but very early on in reruns in the early 80s, was Black Sheep Squadron about Pappy Boynton, starring Robert Conrad. And my dad and I would watch that together. And he never knew his father because his father was killed shortly after he was born. But that was our touch point with that generation, was watching Pappy Boynton fly that Corsair in that show, because he never met anyone from his father's squadron. Whereas today it's easier to find people back, mid 40s, late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s. I mean, all the way up to essentially the internet. It was in social media. It was a lot more difficult to find someone who had served with a relative in World War II. So our touch point was together, sitting on the couch, watching that show. And I always knew that I would one day serve my country in the military, because we didn't just watch that show. We were watching like The Longest Day or Hell is for Heroes, or a lot of World War II type movies back then. But then the Vietnam one started coming in, Uncommon Valor, and of course the Rambos and all those sorts of things. So I guess we had these touch points with military service through popular culture, which highlights the power of popular culture. I mean, it used to be the United States, let me say one of the most powerful exports were movies that Hollywood produced. Let's say in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and they had a different tone to them back then than they do today. And of course, there's other distractions today with social media and the age of information. But movies were an important part of my life and a touch point with that generation, and my relationship with my dad watching those, because he had that touch point with that generation as well through them. And I just knew, hey, I'm going to serve my country in uniform. And I didn't quite know what yet, because you're seeing in World War II, you're seeing Marines at Iwo Jima, you're watching the John Wayne movies, you're doing all these things. And I haven't really heard of SEALs yet, but then I found out what SEALs were. And I found out what the SEALs were, late 70s, very early 80s, somewhere right around that time frame, age 7-ish, and through a movie, The Frogman. And I used to go up to the TV, being the remote control. For those who didn't grow up in the 70s, kids were the remote control back then, and you got to go up and turn their channel. Yeah, there was 4 of them: ABC, CBS, NBC, and the one outlier. And that outlier on Sundays always seemed to be playing some sort of a war movie. So I'd go up there and in the commercials, and my dad would look at his watch and say, go. And I'd turn it to a war movie, and we'd watch for 2 minutes, and I'd turn it back. And one of those showed these guys coming out of the water or climbing up over the beach, blowing up obstacles, and asked my dad about who they were. And the movie was called The Frogmen. And I started pestering him with questions. And he said, ask your mother. And my mom's a librarian. And so we went down to the local library and researched frogmen, UDT, SEALs, found out about that. And then that just kind of snowballed from there. And then every single cultural touch point with special operations, I devoured it, whether that was a book, whether that was a magazine article, whether that was a newspaper article, whether that was a TV show that mentioned them, a movie, whatever it was. I was just, once again, a sponge and taking all of that in. And as part of that process, I started gravitating to the books my parents were reading. And so about 5th grade, I started reading the same things my parents were reading. And that's when Hunt for Red October came out. And I'm David Morrell, I'm reading Nelson DeMille, I'm reading A.J. Quinnell, J.C. Pollock, Mark Olden, Louis L'Amour, reading all these guys who really became my professors in the art of storytelling. But a lot of them had protagonists that had backgrounds in Vietnam. So in the 80s, remember all the TV shows, they started, started with Magnum, and then it moved on. You had A-Team, you had Airwolf, you had Simon and Simon, you had all these shows where the protagonists, where the main characters were Vietnam veterans. And that became a very common thing in movies and television in the 80s. And same thing in books. So a lot of the characters in these novels were either Navy SEALs in Vietnam, Army Special Forces in Vietnam, Marine sniper in Vietnam, some sort of a CIA paramilitary asset in Vietnam. So I was reading these things, even though they were fiction, you couldn't check. You can jump online and do research. You just had to trust that these authors, who are well established on the New York Times list, cranking out these books, that they'd done their research or they talked to somebody. And so that became just a part of my life. And I had such a great experience reading these books that I knew one day after my time in the military, I'll write these same kind of books that I'm enjoying. Wow. So that's the path I was on, and I really never wavered.
It is amazing, though. I have yet to meet an excellent writer that isn't a voracious reader. And it sounds like this started early for you.
It did. I was very fortunate that my mom was a librarian, and we grew up surrounded by books. It was very natural, just like sitting down to dinner or exercising, sleeping, breathing. Reading was also a natural part of our life. It wasn't like, hey, it's time to sit down and read. It was just a natural thing that we did, just like all those other things. It wasn't an extra. It wasn't something that was forced in. It was just a very natural thing. So yeah, it was. I come from the standpoint of a fan, a fan of the genre, and a student of the genre through being a fan, through being a reader. So I talk about reading every chance I get, because it gave me so much. It added so much to my life and continues to do so today.
As a dad, how do you help foster a love of reading in your kids' lives?
Oh, this is the question that gets me, because I read to these kids from the second they got home in the crib, like all the way through until it, became one of those things like, Dad, I can read myself now. And they didn't take to it the way I did. So I think maybe with all these distractions that kids have today, that maybe their path to reading will come through audiobooks. Audiobooks, it's the fastest growing segment of publishing, has been for a while now, and hasn't quite overtaken a physical copy, but it will at some point, I think. And I think these kids, that might be the way that not introduced, but the way that they come to appreciate and love reading and books is through that medium of audiobooks. But we'll see.
Do you think long form is tougher with younger people, since they're used to things like Snapchat or especially TikTok with, if it's over a certain number of seconds, they get bored. I notice this. I watch this. It scares me a bit. I know I'm part of the problem too. Do you think that's part of the issue? Because book reading, sometimes you do it because you're bored, or because there isn't anything out there, and your senses aren't used to being like this hyper changes. Even the cuts of YouTube videos, they have to cut all the time when you're editing a YouTube video. I know this from working with video editors. They're like, if you don't keep cutting, people they'll turn it off. Do you think that's a problem with kids? And if so, what do we do about that?
It's tough because that's also the way they communicate. The same device that is giving them this. The Wall Street Journal called it TikTok brain over the weekend. There's an article called TikTok brain, and I printed it and made my youngest read it. He's 11, and made him read that. And because TikTok is one of the things the kids, I guess they send them each other these videos and all that stuff. But even schools almost encourage it because you're getting your homework through these apps or these websites, and your teachers communicating with you on the same device that is also gives you the ability to have these other things and figure out workarounds if your parents block you or whatever else. And it's a tough time for kids because of that. And I mean, you can even go back. I remember the 80s, even when they talked about the cuts in Miami Vice or TV shows. And I remember reading an article back then, probably in Time or Newsweek or something, that talked about, hey, go back to a TV show from the 50s and compare how often that camera switches between whatever, people talking, scenes, whatever it might be. And it's drastically different. So it's been on this snowball for quite some time, but now obviously with internet and social media, things are speeding up, and it's very difficult, I think, for kids today because they're being programmed to have that TikTok brain. But our guy, he doesn't have it on his phone anymore, and we're trying to educate these kids because they're going to have to operate in this environment where things aren't going to get any slower. It's not going to get any harder to do research or have these inputs from these electronic devices that are becoming more and more prevalent, and everything connected at the same time. So they're going to have to learn to live in that environment. And it's tough. It's tough because I can put the phone away. I can go in the other room and I can plug my phone in and treat it like a landline. That's kind of what I'm moving towards, is doing that, and reverting a little bit back to my roots. But these kids, their roots are 15-second TikTok videos, and it's very difficult to deal with.
Or how does it impact you as a writer when you're telling a story? Do you think about that of getting there quicker, perhaps? I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it. Or how does that impact you as a writer?
No, it doesn't really, just because I think I have that foundation that was built very naturally from my earliest days, and I know what I like, I know what doesn't work for me, and I don't think of how I just want to do the best job I can as a writer for someone who has trusted me with their time they're never going to get back. But it's just writing the best story I can, and a lot of that is just natural. So this next book that comes out, In the Blood, it is my most fast-paced novel to date for sure, but I didn't start out by saying, you know what, I need to speed some things up here, or I don't need to build as much as I have in the previous books to build this foundation and then kind of kick things into high gear. They've all been just very natural, telling these different stories without any sort of a formula or thought to, oh, so-and-so, I saw this email or this critique once that said X, Y, or Z, so now I'm going to incorporate that. No, it's just telling a story the best way I know how, and some people are going to like it, some people are not. This one's very fast paced, but that's not how I started it out. I just started writing, and it just became very fast paced naturally because of the story. So as a storyteller, as a writer, I don't really think of, you know what, this next generation of TikTok brain, I'm going to need to do X, Y, or Z to keep my fan base or my readership. That never enters the equation. It's just doing the best job that I possibly can.
So you've obviously developed and worked hard to become literally one of the world's greatest storytellers. And I think the facts back up that statement. For somebody who's leading a team, Jack, who, let's say the way that they need to get better at telling a story is they have town hall meetings, or they have Monday morning meetings with their teams, and they realize, I found the best bosses, the most impactful leaders are great at storytelling. They're able to weave in kind of events of the world with, okay, here's our challenge for the week or the month or the quarter, whatever. What are some general tips, ideas you would give to that person who right now is probably an average storyteller? They're just okay. They're not great yet. What are some things they could do, some really practical ideas to implement immediately to become a better storyteller?
That is a very good question. I've never even thought of it in those terms before. But yeah, storytelling, obviously very powerful, goes back to the beginning of time, telling stories around a campfire, usually to pass along lessons from the hunt so that your family, your tribe can continue to survive, but also stories of warfare, because you're passing on these lessons learned from going to war with other tribes, and you need to pass that on to the next generation as you get older, and they can pick up the torch and provide for the family, provide for the tribe, defend the family, defend the tribe. So that's really where it starts. So it starts in something very, very visceral, very primal, which is why storytelling resonates with all of us. So that continues today. No matter what you are doing, you're trying to pass along something to a team or whatever it might be, your family, perhaps. That's why storytelling is so ingrained in us, and why you don't really have to think about it in terms of something you need to do. It's just something that becomes part of you as you're talking to people, as part of communication. So I think maybe just recognizing that primal nature of it, where it comes from, and realizing, this isn't some technique I read in a book, or how I need to put it into my PowerPoint presentation to keep the audience's attention, because that's fairly boring. But realizing, hey, this comes from a place like, if my ancestors were not good at hunting and were not good at defending themselves and fighting, I would not be here today. None of us would be here today. And only for a very slim slice of human history have we been able to call 911 to outsource our defense, or have a standing army that protects us, that we really don't need to think about too often. And very slim part of human history where we've been able to go to the grocery store and throw meat into the cart and just look at the price and not think about where it came from. We're so far disconnected from the land and the animals that inhabit it. Same thing with storytelling. We're removed from it, but just like that, if the grocery stores were out of meat, if no one was on the other end of that 911 call, guess what? You're going to have to step up. By default, you can sit there and die and let your family die, or you can step up and you can go out there and hunt, or you can step up and defend your family. Like, there's not a choice. You're defending this gift of life. You have a responsibility for those in your care. But same thing with storytelling. It relates to something so primal that I think recognizing it as such will give you that fire to incorporate it into whatever you're doing to pass along these lessons. So I think thinking of it less in terms of, the latest leadership book said I need to be a better storyteller. Okay, how do I do that? But rather, we're thinking about where it came from, the history of it, and how connected we are to it even today, because we are disconnected, but that disconnection can change in the drop of a hat. If someone attacks you, or we don't have any food in the grocery store anymore, things can change very quickly. And we got a little taste of that at the beginning of COVID, tiny bit of a taste. Some people made some adjustments, others didn't, but it's out there in each and every one of us. So just recognizing where it comes from, and then incorporating it from that place rather than from the latest leadership book, I think is probably the way to go.
I want to go to the time when you, earlier in your life, you decided to become, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL. Right. And I think there's a lot of people who say that, and then they get to the training portion of it. And obviously Navy SEALs are notorious for X number of guys came here to become a SEAL, and about, I don't know what percentage of them actually make it through and become a SEAL. You would know those percentages better than me, right? But it's a much smaller than the initial number that came in. So it's one thing to say, yes, I want to be one. I'm going to be one. I've read about it. I've watched everything. I want to be one. It's another thing to actually make it through and become one. What were the key elements in your makeup that enabled you to make it through this amazingly rigorous process to say, yeah, I want to be a SEAL, and then actually become one?
Well, I think there's a few things there, but it's, that percentage you're talking about is usually about 80% of the people don't make it. 20%, give or take, make it through. And in my head, when I heard that, that's part of the draw.
Yep.
To becoming a SEAL or to going through BUDS is that test. And once again, go back to the primal nature of life, of being tested, especially in more primal cultures. You had this crucible that you had to pass in order to then become essentially a man, become that person who is going to be a leader in the tribe, as a warrior, as a hunter. And in modern times, we have that as well. It's Marine boot camp. You know, it's BUDS for SEAL training. It's the SFQ course. It's firefighters have it. You know, they all these different organizations usually that have a touch point to something a little more primal than being a financial analyst or something. But there is some sort of a crucible that you need to physically and mentally prove yourself by going through, which also gives you something in common with warriors of the past. So no matter if somebody went through SEAL training BUDS in 1975, 1985, 1990, whatever it is, I have something in common with that person. We share this common heritage. We share this common experience, even if we're separated by 30 years, 40 years, 20 years, 10 years, 15, whatever it might be, and never physically serve together. We share this bond, which is an important part of all of these things. But I prepared myself as much as I could. But once again, people do that and they get there and they quit day one, or they quit the first hour of Hell Week.
What's the preparation before you go? What does that look like? Like I just think of a ton of running, lifting weights, obstacle courses. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, so now you can get online, you can do research, you can sign up for courses, that sort of a thing. You can get on training programs. Back when I came in 1996, there was none of that. So I watched these videos of there was a few out there that showed some footage from Vietnam, showed these guys rocking the stoner, and showed these guys running an obstacle course at BUDS, running on the beach. And so I just looked at them climbing ropes, climbing a cargo net, doing a spider wall, those sorts of things. And so even in high school and junior high, I was doing pull-ups and I was switching up my grip, and I'm sprinting the hill outside our house, and I'm putting up a rope in a tree that I'm rappelling out of, then I'm climbing. So I'm doing all these things that are functional in nature, because that's what I'm seeing in these videos, or the still photos that I'm seeing in Soldier of Fortune magazine or Gung Ho magazine, or a couple photos in books that are starting to kind of come out in the mid 80s and then early 90s. So I'm just doing those things, and I'm doing them, but there's no thought to it. It's not like, do a percentage of your your max at this, and okay. No, you're just like lifting as much as you can, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, encyclopedia bodybuilding type, 3 sets of 7 to 10 reps, like that sort of a thing. So you're doing some of that, and then and because once again, popular culture influence. But then I'm doing pull-ups and sit-ups and sprints and swimming and running, and I was always a good runner. Always good at putting weight on my back and moving through the mountains. That was all very, very natural. So I'm just doing those sorts of things physically, but then a lot of guys do that and fail day one. So what I thought of as I was going through was all the people that had died or sacrificed so much for me to be able to choose my path in life, or be able to be there on that beach in Coronado, California, doing my push-ups in the sand, getting yelled at, being sleep deprived during Hell Week, and running around with the boats on your head, or the log PT. And I think, you know what, I'm not storming a beach at Normandy. I'm not going over the beach at Iwo Jima. I am not, in Vietnam, in Laos, Cambodia, with no support whatsoever, with one other American and 3 Montagnard tribesmen here on this trail, setting up an ambush. I'm not doing any of those things. All I need to do here is work, put out, and not quit. And yeah, I have standards I need to pass. I need to run this X number of miles in a certain amount of time every week and have my time get better. Same thing with swim, same thing with obstacle courses, same thing with some of the things you need to do to show that you're comfortable in the water, like a dive in the diving phase, or life-saving, or whatever it might be. Show you're safe with explosives and firearms. Like, you have to do those things as well. But I would put it in relative terms and think of all the things that people had to do from the inception of this country up until today that allowed me to be there, choosing to follow my passion, follow my dream of serving my country in uniform as a SEAL. So that really helped, I think.
Was there ever a moment during it where you were close to not making it?
No, I mean, people say, hey, if you say you never thought about quitting, I mean, you think about quitting and that you're seeing people quit all the
Right.
time, thinking like,
Right.
oh, I could ring that bell and I could be warm again. I could have a donut and coffee. And so I thought about it in those terms. But I didn't ever think of, oh man, I am so close to quitting right now. Like if they make me do one more push up, I'm going to go and I'm going to ring that bell and have this be over. Like I never thought of it like that. I was just like, I need to do a few more push-ups. Like I need to do a few more. And I see people quitting in droves. And to me, that was the system working. Like, hey, this person is not tough enough to be here, because this is not just testing our physical strength and stamina. It is testing our this mental fortitude that is so important in anything in life. But they're testing us here on this beach by doing the things that they're doing here. And so I thought about it in those terms, and I was like, hey, this system is working. Awesome. I'm going to be standing at the end of the day.
So I played for high school coaches and some college coaches who had military backgrounds, played football. And one of the things that they learned and picked up from the military was in June and July, they basically wanted to see who was going to be able to be tough when it got really hard, when you got tired, when the other team was physically bigger, stronger, faster than you, which was the case for most of the teams we played against. And so because of that, they said, and they told us this all the time about the military times, was that they were basically going to punish us close to death in June and July and August. And they were doing that to make sure that the people that were left were the ones that you knew you could look to your right and you could look to your left, and that guy was going to be there. He was not going to quit. He was going to be able to stand up when he's really tired, when he's beat up, right? Can you share about the importance of trust, the trust that was built through going through really hard stuff together?
Yeah, that trust. And I didn't really think about trust until I took a breath after my last Iraq deployment, when I thought of, hey, I've seen so many people over the years in leadership positions not be able to make it. And I've seen people who are great at position X, not so great at position Y, and have to move on. And but I was so busy during those years, especially after September 11th and transitioning over from being an enlisted SEAL to being an officer. I never stopped to think about what I was doing. I was just doing. So it's really when I started to realize the importance of trust is after I got back, took a breath, realized, hey, I've just done my last deployment to Iraq, where I'm going to be tactically maneuvering guys on the battlefield. From here on out, if I stay in, I'm coming back as a team CO, commanding officer at some point, which sounds impressive, but in real life, when you come back in today's military as an 05, as a commanding officer, you're more of a manager. You're not out there leading from the front, kicking in doors. And if you do get out there with the guys, they don't want you there because you haven't done this 18-month workup with them, getting to know these standard operating procedures, building that trust at the tactical level. Like your job is now up here at the operational level, where you're providing assets and you're leading by example and that sort of a thing. But you are back in the tactical operations center, have no mistake about it. So for me, hey, it was time to move on. Took that breath, knew exactly what I was going to do next, which is write these thrillers, because that's what I wanted to do my whole life. But I thought back on the previous years, and trust was what bubbled to the forefront of my mind. Like, that is why I have been successful downrange, is because of that trust with the guys, because they knew that they were going to get my honest assessment regardless. I wasn't just going to regurgitate something from senior level leadership and say, hey, this is the military, salute and let's go. You can't do that today. Maybe in some other units, or maybe, I don't know, but for me, I have to be honest with my guys and give them my honest assessment, because that they can count on 100%. And then this is the art of leadership, is that I'm going to have to figure out how to field these questions and how to translate something that might not make sense to us here at the tactical level, that's coming down from these strategic level leaders at the politicians even, and senior military generals, admirals, that sort of a thing. filtering down to us. Now, as a leader, how do we do these things? How do we adapt to get the job done? How do we do it as safely as we possibly can? How do we continue to crush the enemy, but do so in a way that these guys know that I'm just not regurgitating something from senior level leadership? Because if you do that, you've lost that trust. Done. It is over. And then when the bullets start flying and you need something to happen, that trust, the whole unit will disintegrate. So for me, doesn't matter what it is, whether it was a 2-minute conversation in the hallway, or it was a run on the beach, or it was getting out there on the range, even as I got more senior levels of leadership and shooting with the guys, doing these stress courses with the guys, competing with the guys. You're building that camaraderie and you're building that trust. And that is the most important aspect of leadership in general, is that trust, establishing it and then continuing to build on it and never stopping building, because you can lose it quick. You can lose it quick.
I want to talk about being a sniper. It's kind of glamorized in movies and shows. What's the makeup of a great sniper? What are the characteristics of one who's really good at that job?
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, you have to be technically proficient, know the capabilities of your weapon system and yourself, but also know the limitations of that weapon system and yourself. And I don't think we talk about that enough, is knowing your limitations. But you have to know those if you're going to be able to employ that weapon system, employ your brain the way it needs to be employed downrange to do whatever mission that is as a sniper. It's transitioned, I think, a lot more from the art of sniping, which is when I went through sniper school in 2000. I always knew I wanted to be a sniper. That's one of the main reasons I came in enlisted, because I knew officers weren't snipers. And that's what I wanted to do. There was something about the man and the rifle that just appealed to me, especially reading stories about a sniper being off there either by himself or as a team of 2 people in some of the books that I read, about Vietnam and that sort of thing. Some things about Marine Sniper School, that sort of a thing. And I was just drawn towards the rifle. There was just something about it. But back in 2000, we were still working off the lessons of Vietnam. And a lot of that was art, and the science didn't really come in until some of the technology caught up to the tactics of the battlefield, to the lessons of the battlefield. And I think a lot after I went through, let's say about 2006-07 timeframe, then a lot more of that science started to work its way in. For us, the guys that went through in that pre-September 11th timeframe, and even maybe a few classes after, that it was more of an art. But yeah, you have to be technically proficient. You have to pass all these very difficult courses of fire, the stalking portion, all those things. And if you don't pass it, I don't know what the attrition of sniper school was, but it was fairly high. But it was, once again, it's a test. Like after Buds, like that was the thing that I was not most worried about, but I guess it was a worry, because if I didn't pass it, I was going to be devastated. And luckily I did make it, but it was just something that was innate in me that I wanted to do. But characteristics wise, I don't think there's anything that Hollywood probably does portray it more as, hey, what are the attributes of a good sniper? And they have to be, steely and strong and compartmentalized. And I don't know. I mean, we're just people doing a job that have to be good at that job. And that's really it. It's not anything other than that. I mean, eyesight obviously helps, and that sort of a thing, being able to have that art of reading the winds, being able to not just dial your dope in the rifle, but also hold for different targets as different weapon systems came online, like the SR-25, Mark 11 auto-loading weapon systems. You adapt to those. The Mark 12, 5.56 auto-loading weapon system. You get to know that. You have an arsenal essentially at your disposal, not just the M4 that you're going in doing assaults with. You can pick based off what the mission is. But really those auto-loading weapon systems became what I personally gravitated to, because you could use them in multiple different scenarios instead of just having the bolt action 301 mag or 50 that reaches out there quite a ways, but you might not want to take into a room doing some close quarter combat type scenario.
How realistic is the Chris Kyle movie American Sniper?
I'll tell you what, whoever did the set design for that movie, that is what Ramadi looked like in 2005, 2006.
Really?
Like, I've only seen it once, but that's what stood out for me because I was there before that task unit got there in 2005, 2006, and that's what it looked like. So for me, having been there and walked
Did you have a similar job or the same job?
I was a sniper. Yeah, I was a new,
But you were
fairly new.
doing like the same type of stuff that he was in that movie?
Yeah, so we'd go in, kind of sneak into the city at night, set up sniper positions in either abandoned buildings or sometimes ones that have people in them, and set up on high traffic like IED type areas before Marines would come in the next day. So we had intel. It was fairly more basic at the time, I think, but it was more you could look at a map of the city and you could map out all the IEDs, all the ambushes that had been historical in nature. You could plot them and see, oh, look at a lot more red here in this area than over here. Let's just go set up over there. And the next time somebody comes in and digs a hole and drops something in it, we can shoot them. So, that's what it was very rudimentary. I'm sure it got a lot, I don't know, we got a lot smarter at that sort of thing, I would hope, as time went on. And I think we'd probably be better at it today. But yeah, we're doing a similar mission. And that was it was interesting. Got a little Western out there, as you can imagine. But that movie, man, it looked like Ramadi. I think that the uniforms were pretty good, the weapon systems were pretty good, that sort of thing. A couple things though, and I can't not say it. No one would ever call their wife from the middle of a firefight. Like I like that one stood out to me as like, you'd be fired and sent home so fast. You're just like all that thing, that trust we talked about before. Yeah. Well, guess what? We're in the middle of a firefight. You're calling your wife. Like, I can't imagine that ever happening. And if it ever did, fired immediately. You're home. You're done. You will never operate again.
Yeah. That was the Hollywood part, huh? It was obviously a dramatic moment.
Yeah, it has to be. But the other thing they got really, they did a great job with in that movie was the coming home part. And I don't think I've seen another movie that really, illustrates visually from a storytelling perspective what it's like to be in combat one day and then to be home, expected to change your first diaper on your kid the next day, essentially. Maybe not the next day, 36 hours later, let's say, because you fly out of there, you have to land somewhere for Crew West, probably Germany or Spain, and then flying to the East Coast, and then you're home. And West Coast, they, different for them, maybe a little longer, but essentially within a couple days, you are going from combat to doing household chores and thrown right back into this mix without being able to really take a breath. And luckily I was very good at that. If I'd flip that switch it was just natural. Like, okay, I'm not in combat anymore. I'm going to flip the switch. And now I'm home.
Wow. I can't imagine. I can't imagine that though.
Yeah. It was not unexpected. Okay. It was like, hey, don't let it be a shock that one day you're going to be in combat and the next day you're going to be home, because that's how it's going to be. Eventually, we got a little better at it. We had these decompression stops on the way home where we'd stop in Germany and they'd have 3 days, I think, to take a breath and kind of get used to, hey, I'm going to sleep tonight and I'm not on vampire hours anymore. And the odds of an RPG or a mortar landing on my hooch or hitting this hotel are a lot slimmer than it was in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it just allows you to take that breath. And if you need to talk to some sort of a psychiatrist, they're here. There's a chaplain here if you need to talk to them. So, but then they just became huge drink fests and just party fests. Of course, most people did that with them, but I think a few would have had to take advantage of someone being there. So it probably did help a lot of people. But for me, it wasn't a shock that, hey, this is how it's going to go. I'm going to go do this job and then I'm going to be home 36 hours later. And guess what? I'm not in combat anymore. I'm still vigilant. But I'm just vigilant anyway as a human being, because that's just, natural. But now it's time to get to know the family again. And so I was always very good at that. Only one time I wasn't, and my wife was like, hey, snap out of it. And I was like, oh, okay.
What were you doing? What happened?
I had a very intense deployment and it was awesome. And I came home. I was the last guy to come home. My commanding officer, I was detailed over to the CIA at the time. And my commanding officer had to call and say, get on that bird that's leaving at this time. Come home. I'm not shaving. I have long hair. I'm doing this. I just was having a wonderful deployment and I didn't want to come home because I wanted to keep doing the job. And then when I came home, I was just thinking about the guys that were still over there in that agency unit that I've been attached to, which coincidentally forms the basis of my second book, True Believer, but and weaves its way into the other novels as well. But I just wanted to be there doing the job and thinking about getting back after it. And my wife was like, "Jay, snap out of it." And that's all it took. I mean, for me, that was all it took. It was like, "Oh, okay. Usually I've been really good at this." And I remember once, like the pressure in the house changed for some reason. And that was the only time I've ever been, people say they hear a car backfire and they drop and, that sort of thing. I never had that kind of thing happen, but the pressure change, in a house when that door opens and maybe the air conditioning's on, or I don't know what it is, but the pressure change was kind of familiar in that when I don't know, RPG or whatever hits, and there's just this kind of like a pressure change sometimes that was reminiscent. That's the only time I can remember ever being like, but it was just for a second, and I think it's probably pretty natural, but yeah, you just go from combat and you come home and you adapt, and life's about adaptation and moving forward, and no matter what you're doing.
I was going to say, I was going to ask you, like, what skills that you developed as a SEAL that has made you good since you've come home. Obviously, in addition to being a writer, you're a writer and you write these amazing thrillers, all these bestsellers, but you're doing a lot of work. So you think that's a big one, that you're just, there's not really any situation that somebody could drop you into that you're not going to be able to adapt and find a way to get whatever you need to get done? Is that like a big skill of yours you developed, or what else beyond that that's helped you be able to do so well since coming home from some of these, I can only imagine, as wild situations and deployments you've been on over the years?
Yeah, I think that's fairly natural. It's not something that was like, taught to us, other than, probably in an academic class at some point talking about adaptation from a military standpoint. But it's just natural in life to adapt to changing environments and changing situations, because nothing's going to remain static, and eventually you're going to get hit, you're going to get knocked down, and you have to get back up and keep moving forward. And you have to get up in a way, you don't have to, you can choose to get up in a way that inspires those around you, or you can choose to get up complaining and whining and talking about how tough life is. And you can influence people that way to the detriment of what they have going on, possibly. So you get to choose that. But I think adapting is just something as humans that we have to do, because we have to do that to survive. You don't have to be in the military to figure that out. And so for me, when I got out, I never studied marketing. I never studied any sort of advertising, or my study of the publishing world came from being a fan, from being a reader. And I thought that when I got out, I would write these thrillers. I thought they'd be #1 New York Times bestsellers, and that
you did.
And then an A-list star would option it. And as I was writing, I thought of Chris Pratt, even before Guardians of the Galaxy and before the Avengers and before Jurassic World, before he was an A-list star. I thought of him, and I thought of Antoine Fuqua directing. And I thought and to me, it was that was a very natural thing to think of from being a child of the 80s and wanting to do this my whole life. I never thought about how hard it is, or that I never thought that an A-list actor would not option this and it would not come to the screen. I didn't waste any bandwidth worrying about that sort of thing. But what I thought a writer did was just write. And, maybe in the past, let's say 40 years ago, that is probably what an author did, was write, send the book to New York, start the next one, maybe do a book tour for a week, maybe 7 days, maybe 10, maybe do a couple appearances here and there, go back to writing. That before the advent of the internet and social media. And that's probably how it was. And there are probably a few people out there that are the outliers that people don't think are outliers because they're the casual observer. So let's say a J.K. Rowling, or let's say a 50 Shades of Grey type of a series, a Twilight type of a series, where they're just going to rocket to the moon. And they're, for whatever reason, the word of mouth takes over and it's just going to crush. Okay, that is the smallest percentage of authors and writers out there. So very quickly, to me, I looked at the landscape, and just like I would the battlefield, and I thought, oh, okay, here in this day and age, I have a choice. I can do that and just hope that my publisher does these things in marketing and advertising that get the book where it can be. And I'm just going to be a passive observer of that. And I saw other authors and heard them complaining about that. And so I thought, hey, this publisher, Simon & Schuster, Emily Bessler Books, Atria, has given me my shot, my lifelong dream to do this other than being a SEAL. They've given me my shot. Now it's my turn to prove to them that they made a good investment in me. How can I do that? Well, I can write the best novels I possibly can. So at the base level, you have to have, no matter what it is, you have to have that product has to be top notch. It has to be the best it can possibly be. But then people have to know it exists. And rather than just hoping that the publisher is going to do that, knowing that most books don't make back their initial investment, and that much like the Avengers movies makes all the money for all the movies that won at the Oscars, the same thing in publishing. Stephen King, John Grisham, James Patterson, those names that you know, they're making the money for all the people that don't make back their initial investments from the publishing houses. So I thought, well, hey, I can adapt to this changing environment. I can adapt just the way I did on the battlefield, looking at the enemy. They're adapting to me. I need to adapt as well. I look for gaps in the enemy's defenses, capitalize on momentum, and I can use tools that were not available to authors in, say, 1985. I can start a podcast. I can be on other people's podcasts. I can, on social media, I can engage. I can share the journey with people in a way that adds value to their life, so that when the book does come out, they're interested in reading it. So I can create this readership that I couldn't have created in 1985 because those platforms did not exist. So what do? You adapt to that changing environment and make use of these that allow me to do what I love to do, which is the writing. So for me, it was just a very natural thing to do, is just to look at the landscape, take a breath, figure it out, and you have to constantly evolve, just like with anything in life, business, personal, whatever. You have to evolve and adapt, and this is what I did in the publishing landscape.
In the beginning, I believe, did you get introduced to Brad Thor, and he made an introduction for you? How did that go?
Yeah, so I got, once again, and I write, there's a new edition of the Terminal List coming out to coincide with the series. And there's actually 3 of them. There's a paperback with Chris Pratt on the cover. There's a trade paperback, which is the larger version paperback that has Chris Pratt on the cover. And then there's another new hardcover that's going to come out that has a little different copy, but for the most part, the same cover, but with a new foreword that talks about this journey and explains like how this happened. And I did get extremely, and I talk about luck, and I talk about luck being the residue of preparation, which is something that a former commanding officer passed on to us at SEAL Team 2. And I thought about that and passed it on to everyone I've worked with since. But a friend of mine sat next to Brad Thor, who's a thriller author in this genre, at a fundraiser, one of these SEAL fundraiser things. And they hit it off. And then this former SEAL who had passed, I hadn't served directly with, but we had met each other in passing, and he knew me by reputation in the SEAL team, which is your currency in special operations, which is obviously based on character. But he then found out that I was writing a book, and that's what I wanted to do next. And so he picked up the phone and called and said, "Hey, so-and-so said you're writing a book and you're getting out. You want to talk to Brad Thor?" And I was like, "What? Okay, would he talk to me?" And my friend said, "Yeah, I helped him out with a couple of books, and happy to make that introduction, kind of like, hey, he owes me one type of a thing." But if I didn't have that reputation that I did, he wouldn't have felt that he could risk his political capital with Brad Thor to make that introduction. And so I talked to Brad, and I was about, I think, 4 or 5 months into writing at the time. And now I know how many people tell you they want to be an author. And so I was probably the same to him. And he never thought this would get to where it did. Now I know, because now we're friends. But he talked to me, and it was like a job interview, and kind of asked me like why I wanted to write. And I told him the whole story about my life that we just talked about here. And he's like, "All right, hey, stop talking." Kind of like, "Hey, you passed my test." And he said, "Hey, if you write this, your friend told me some things that you did in the SEAL teams. And because of that, I can let Simon & Schuster know it's coming. I'm not going to help you along the way. I'm not going to give you any advice. I can't guarantee they'll open the package. Can't guarantee they'll read one word. Obviously can't guarantee they'll like it. But what the least I can do for what your friend said that you did in the teams as a thank you is to let them know it's coming." And I was like, boom, that's all I need. And he said, "When's it coming out? And when you be done?" I said, 1 year from today. And I called him back 1 year from the day and I said, "Do you remember me?" And he did. And yeah, and to his credit, it was really cool, because I was trying to make that deadline. That's my first deadline. He was like, "Well, is it as good as it can possibly be?" And I was like, "Well, I finished it, but I could probably spend a little more time editing it, reading it." And because I was like, came in under the wire, type of like slid in.
The full book.
The full book, yeah.
Full book, not a proposal. So the full thing. Okay.
Full thing, yeah. In fiction, you have to have the whole book done. Like nonfiction, you can sell an idea or an outline or a story, but in fiction, you have to have it done. And he said, well, hey, spend some more time with it. And when it is as good as you can possibly make it, call me back. So I took another 4 months just reading it and rereading it and moving some things around. And then I called him back and said, it's as good as it can possibly be. And he said, okay, I'll let him know. And so I sent it in, and he expected that Emily Besser, who is both of our editor publisher, would read it and call him and say, hey, what do you want me to tell this guy? You know, and instead she did the opposite. She loved it and called Brad, and he called me and said, hey, you've been struck by lightning. And so next month I'm in New York talking to her, and I didn't even know I needed an agent. I had no idea, and I'm glad I didn't, because I might still be looking for one today. But then she introduced me to 4 agents, and I chose one, and then we're off to the races. So it's very, very fortunate, that's for sure.
That is, wow. How much of the published book, like, was there much more editing needed to be done, or was it pretty much ready to roll?
Yeah, I was shocked, because I'm like, wow, it's my dream publisher with my dream editor, Emily Besser. Like, that's exactly, it's kind of like I wanted Chris Pratt to star, Antoine Fuqua to direct.
How did you know all this stuff? Like, how could you envision this? That's wild to me.
Yeah, I went to the back of Vince Flynn and Brad Thor novels and saw them thanking someone named Emily Besser at Emily Besser Books, who published them under an umbrella of Simon & Schuster as an imprint. And I was like, okay, Emily Besser will be my publisher and editor. Yeah, I never thought of the odds. One of my life mantras is never pay attention to the odds, because you're wasting bandwidth thinking about that instead of focused on doing what you need to do. In my case, that's making the books the best they can possibly be, especially that first one. If I was worried about an editor, worried about a publisher, worried about an agent, worried about a website, worried about a social media presence, worried about sales, I was worried about none of that. I was only focused on
do the work.
Exactly. Do the work. Because I can guarantee that if you don't do the work, you won't get where you're headed. Can't guarantee that even if you do the work, you'll get there. But I know that if you don't do the work, you're not getting there. So I was shocked that, because I thought, oh, it's going to my dream editor and publisher. She's going to have a ton of changes. She's going to make this thing good. And it came back with like 3 things. And I'm not talking copy edits, commas and stuff like that. I'm talking about content edits. And she was like, hey, would he really say this here? Would he do this here? And one thing I can't remember right now, but it was like 3 things like that. And I was like, oh, maybe he wouldn't say that, or maybe wouldn't. So I just changed those things, because going in, I was like, I'm not going to be that crazy artist that's hard to deal with, that's saying you're ruining my art. This is going to Emily Besser. If she wants me to change it, if she wants aliens from outer space to come down here and conduct some sort of attack in the middle of this, guess what's coming? Aliens from outer space. And so I just resigned myself to that early on, but there were such minor changes. And that's how it's been with all the novels to date. She looks at those and very similar type of feedback.
You'd be a dream author to work with. Hey, you turn in basically a finished product. I mean, that would be the best. That would be awesome.
Yeah, the titles, I think it's
they're all yours.
Title, yep. Because I don't want to waste bandwidth. Once again, worried about a title as I'm writing.
Is the title at the beginning or the end?
The title at the beginning. Yeah. So
okay. I have the titles at the beginning. Okay.
I have I want to know where I'm headed. Yep. Although we can shift and morph as things develop and characters.
Do you know the ending before you start?
Yeah, because I like to know where I'm going, and I'm not worried about as I'm going. Oh, geez, I don't know where this is headed. Oh boy, I don't want that to. Once again, I don't want that bandwidth.
You got to know that you got to know where you're going. Okay. Yeah. And so your process as you're thinking, because you're always probably thinking of ideas for books, I would imagine your mind can't turn off. I somewhat understand what that's like, but not always knowing kind of how it's going to. Nonfiction versus fiction is completely different too. I know. Speaking of that, though, a lot of SEALs write nonfiction books, most of them, in fact, or almost all of them. What made you say, no, I'm not going to, I'm going to go fiction. I'm going to write thrillers. I'm going to write these novels, as opposed to what most SEALs do is write the nonfiction books.
Yeah, I just was always drawn towards writing that fiction from such an early age that I never considered writing the nonfiction stuff. And plus reading the nonfiction that I loved reading growing up. I mean, oh my goodness, I read everything I possibly could that was nonfiction on special operations, warfare, terrorism, insurgencies, counterinsurgencies. I was a student of warfare from a very early age. But to me, that just was, I knew, hey, there's going to be guys that do amazing things. And I'm just going to contribute wherever I can. And okay. But what I did pales in comparison. Maybe if I had done something that crazy, then maybe I'd go down that route, but probably not. Probably not. Because it opens you up also to, you're going to get critiqued no matter what. Fiction, and it's not just reading like one review in a newspaper and then not having others. No, there are thousands and thousands of reviews out there, and people are going to love to tell you how much they hate you, whether they've read the book or not, based off what they think they know about you. And that's just a part of the deal. If you're going to engage with a readership, like, you're going to see those things, and that's just a part of it. But writing the nonfiction, people have different perspectives on things. People have different, even if we're involved in the same action. That's why, people that are that witness a crime, that are interviewed by detectives later, will often see the exact same thing, but they'll have, hey, the car was red. No, the other person was standing next to you that swears that it is yellow, or whatever. That is very common. So the different perspectives that come out, especially in the fog of war, when you're in a firefight on nods, things are chaotic. Maybe there's smoke, maybe there's fire, maybe there's people wounded, whatever it might be. There's so many varying perspectives there, and you come back, and of course you do a debrief, you do a hot wash, and you pass on those lessons learned to the next teams coming in. You disseminate it within your own unit. You just try to get it out there to the rest of the military, so people don't learn those same lessons in blood. But I just had no interest on anyone ever picking apart something that was real because of a perspective that, while valid, might be like those people that see an accident or a crime. It might vary a little bit. It just didn't interest me. And people do, have to deal with that if they write nonfiction, no matter if they're SEALs or Army Special Forces or a Marine or whatever it might be. But I do think they are valuable in so many different ways. Those first person perspectives, they become, part of the history of the conflict, and they're not definitive. They are that person's perspective on a single mission, on their time in uniform, whatever it might be. That is one person's perspective that then other people can look at and read along with after action reports. They can read along with other people's perspective to put together this history. So I do think they're important in that respect. And two, they're important probably more so today than they even were for me growing up, in that they inspire the next generation. Yep. And a lot of these stories, like, oh my gosh, the guys that have received the Medal of Honor and written books about their engagements, oh my goodness, so that what they went through, it's just in most cases thinking they're going to die, but not dying, and then writing about those experiences and writing about what it's like afterward. I think it's so valuable to this next generation, because this next generation needs heroes. And there are so many distractions out there. There are so many other influences out there that they look to these days because of the phones, because of social media, because of these different platforms. But having somebody who stepped up to serve their country, that went down range, that was part of something extraordinary, and then come back and writes about it, allows that person in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, high school, college, just entering the workforce, to be like, wow. And doesn't even have to inspire them to join the military, but it can inspire them in that, hey, wow, this person thought they were going to die. They were knocked down. Look at this story. Oh, you know what I'm dealing with in life, I can put that in relative terms now. And this person did this so that me, my kids, my family could have these options and opportunities that previous generations did. So I think there's a few levels that those first person accounts and those nonfiction accounts are valuable in, and it is a shame, I think, that they get a bad rap from senior level military leaders who coincidentally usually get out and write their own very thick book from a strategic type of a level. That's always very interesting. But they kind of demonize typically the enlisted guy or the person that was actually in combat for doing something similar. So that's always very interesting, but I do think they are very valuable. So, and I felt that when I was in, even when I heard senior level people talk disparaging guys that got out and wrote books about their experiences, and it's therapeutic to that individual in many instances. So it's inspiring another generation. It's therapeutic to that individual, and just like anything in life, some books will be quote unquote good, and this is all subjective. Some will not be as good,
Right.
and just hey, that's just how it goes. So I think they're valuable on a few different levels.
Well, one more question. Your book turned into a show. Chris Pratt, Amazon. I mean, dude, how is that? You envisioned this though? That which is wild. I mean, tell me about this. That this is turning into what I saw the clips of the teaser. Like it looks amazing. I mean, what was the process like of getting that deal done and then starting to shoot, because it's all done now, I assume, obviously. Like what was that like?
Yeah, it was crazy because, like I said, as I'm typing away and I don't have any connection to publishing. When I started, I had no connection to show business or Hollywood. I just thought Chris Pratt's going to play this main role, and Antoine Fuqua is going to direct, and Besser will be my editor. Like all those things, as I was just typing away, focused on the novel, and then book's coming out. So it's coming out in March of 2018. So in November of 2017, buddy from the SEAL teams calls, and this is another one of those crazy things that just happens in life. And he calls me. I hadn't talked to him in about 5 years, and his name is Jared Shaw, great guy. He was an E6, and he was getting out of the military. And I sat him down in my office and we talked about transitioning out of the military. I introduced him to a few people in the private sector, and I totally forgot about it. And he calls me 5 years later and he says, "Hey, do you remember me?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely, Jared. How's it going?" And he said, "Do you remember what you did for me in the teams?" No problem, because I'm always going to help good guys, whether they're staying in or getting out. Once again, part of that trust. And he said, "Hey, I heard you have a book coming out." And I said, "Yeah, it's coming out in a few months. I have this thing called a galley copy, which is like a rough draft I can send you if you want to check it out." And he said, "Yeah, man, I'd love to check it out, but I'd like to give one to a friend of mine." And I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Chris Pratt." I was like, "Oh, interesting," because I envisioned Chris Pratt playing this role. And so I sent it to Jared. He gave it to Chris Pratt, and Chris read it and called the next week and wanted to option it. So it's that's crazy. But even once that happens, most books, if they get optioned, they never get made into films and all that. But this one did. And Antoine at the same time had met another friend of mine, Mark Owen, who wrote the book No Easy Day, at some sort of a speaking event. And Mark had helped him out on Equalizer 2. And so he gave a copy to Antoine at the same time. And I had no idea that was happening. And so he called about the same time that Chris did and wanted to do it as well. And then they connected and talked about it and ended up saying, "Hey, let's all partner on this." And now all three of us are executive producers on this thing. And it started filming in March of 2021. And we finished in August, and it went into post-production. And I've been involved with every aspect of it. And yeah, now it's coming out July 1st.
Wow, man. Congrats. I can't wait to watch it. I appreciate your time today, Jack. Obviously, thank you for your service. Thank you for your amazing work and all the thrillers. Now you're moving to the big screen. I'm pumped for you. I really appreciate this, and certainly I would urge people to go check out all of Jack's books. I mean, it's there, and you keep pumping them out. The Terminal, True Believer, Savage Son, The Devil's Hand, In the Blood coming out here shortly, and then obviously on Amazon coming soon this summer. So thanks so much, Jack. I really appreciate it. And I'd love to continue our dialogue as we both progress, man.
Yeah, that sounds great. And thank you for the insightful questions. I really appreciate it. I love talking about this stuff. As you can tell, I love talking about writing and process and all the rest of it. So thank you for the great questions. And hopefully we can link up in person one of these days soon.
Love it, man. Thank you.
Awesome. Take care.